Uhuru. My name is Chimarenga Silambao. I'm the National Director of Organization for the African People's Socialist Party. I want to thank the press for being here today. In addition, I want to thank our supporters for being here as well. The African People's Socialist Party has called this press conference to make our official statement on Russia's defensive war in Ukraine. The statement we will open it up after the statement for questions. And now I give you the leader of the African nation, founder and chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, as well as chairman of the African Socialist International, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who will be delivering the official statement of the African People's Socialist Party on the current defensive war in Ukraine by Russia.
Uhuru, the African People's Socialist Party calls for unity with Russia in its defensive war in Ukraine against the world colonial powers. The February 2014 CIA inspired or initiated and led coup in Ukraine was a crucial event contributing to Russia's defensive war being fought in Ukraine. However, the event most significant to this war was the invasion of Russia following the 1917 revolution that resulted in the establishment of a socialist state stemming from an international movement to destroy the global parasitic capitalist system. It was this invasion of Russia by all the colonial powers of the world, including Japan and the United States, that the African People's Socialist Party recognizes as the critical event that should contribute to an African position on the current war being fought in Ukraine. This was the beginning of the colonial war against Russia that it is fending itself against today in its Ukrainian iteration. The invasion of Russia by colonial powers in 1918 was an invasion to protect the colonial mode of production that was begun with the attack on Africa more than 600 years ago. The threat of what would become Soviet Russia as revolutionary abettors and examples for the emancipation of the workers and the oppressed of the world could not be tolerated by the colonialists. This was the basis of the united invasion of Russia in 1918 and the ongoing economic quarantine intended to break the back of the Soviet Union. This is also the basis of the 1949 creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, explicitly created to contain and crush Soviet Russia. The existing world order, led since 1949 by the international colonialist bloc known as the Atlanticists, achieved its current political and economic anti-Russia configuration during this period of the 1940s. In the 1980s, the US government under the regime of James Earl Carter, with the leadership of Zbigniew Brzezinski, his national security advisor, drew the Soviet Union into military conflict in Afghanistan to overthrow its government that was allied with Soviet Russia and to extend NATO borders closer to Soviet encirclement. A host of so-called color revolutions and related struggles aided by opportunism, the white desire to join the white colonial world of Europe and the United States in partaking of the flesh of the colonized and to experience the standards of life common to other white people to our disadvantage has led to the expansion of NATO. Since the 1991 dissolution of the Soviet Union, the US has worked to contain Russia. According to one online source, since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, the NATO military alliance has extended its borders 800 miles to the east, incorporating Poland, Hungary, Czechia, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Ukraine, Slovenia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. In 2021, NATO officially recognized Ukraine itself as an aspiring member, and Sweden and Finland are also considering joining the anti-Russian alliance. While many have been forced to recognize the existence of colonialism as it relates to individual countries, most do not understand that the initial 15th century European colonization of Africa developed into a mode of production, a colonial mode of production that continues to define the political and economic landscape of the world. European identity and the existing colonial mode of production enveloping the world were achieved during this period. Unlike most of Europe, Russian development from feudalism did not go through the colonial mode of production, but is a product of the Russian socialist revolution. This is why Russia today, although it makes no pretense of being communist or revolutionary, has been able to briefly enter into the colonial mode of production on its own terms, free from the absolute dictates of the US. Under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, Russia has become an active, aggressive opponent of the unipolar world domination of the United States. This confounds and challenges the strategic equilibrium of the colonial mode of production, contributing to the crisis made manifest within the United States domestically and fracturing US-dominated hegemonic unity of the Atlanticist globally. The 2014 CIA engineered coup to put a puppet in power in Ukraine on Russia's western border, along with the imposition of a puppet government and fascist-filled military, and the murder of an estimated 13,000 ethnic Russian Ukrainians in the 8 years since the coup, was the beginning of an intensification of the 100-year-long war against Russia that has resulted in the existential defensive war being fought by Russia against the global colonial ruling class and its minions. Thus, it is absolutely necessary for Africans to take a definitive stance in solidarity with Russia, which, independent of its own consciousness, is fighting against the power of colonial slavery that has dominated the life of Africa and Africans for over 600 years. Uhuru.
Thank you, Chairman. So we'll now open up the floor to the press for questions. We have no questions.
Thank you, Comrade Chimarenga Salambayo, and thank all of you who have participated in this production. We think it's extremely important to put forward a position, especially from Africa, but from most of the colonized peoples of the world, on this, this brutal war that is being waged against Russia by all of the colonial powers, using Ukraine as a vehicle for doing that. If you would dare to take a look at how the forces are lining up in this struggle, it becomes clear that this is a white man's war that's being made against Russia. This is a war of all of the colonial powers against Russia. And the reason Russia is such a problem is because it did not it was not created through the enslavement and colonization of African and oppressed peoples around the world. And this is exactly why we see that the peoples who are less inclined to unite with this attack on Russia are coming from oppressed peoples around the world, from the colonized around the world, from those who have known the lash of the white man's whip on our backs, either as colonial slaves or other forms of colonial victimization. So we feel like it's really important to be able to make this statement and to actually identify what we see happening with Russia is a mob of lynchers. It's like a lynch mob is what we're looking at, where the question is never asked seriously about the basis for the attack, that it actually requires senseless following by people, especially in what they characterize as the West, which is the colonial powers of the world, a senseless kind of blind obedience. It's like everything except pitchforks and torches in the night. It is a white man's lynch mob that we're looking at in NATO, this military force of 30 different countries lined up. The assault on Russia in the economic sphere, which is something that they do to countries around the world. Right now, Afghanistan is starving as a consequence of the war that the United States fought for 20 years against the starving people there, and lost that war, which is part of the thing that created the crisis that this country is going through right now, that is to say, the United States. And so the United States, unable to defeat the Afghans on the battlefield, have taken to starving the people, holding money that belongs to the Afghan people, and requiring that the Afghan government submit and act as a defeated country in order to receive its own resources. The US government has stolen resources and refused to give resources that belong to the people of Venezuela, belong to the people of Iran. It controls the world's banks and things like this, which is one of the things that we see this evidence being imposed on Russia. Again, right now, to starve Russia, to starve the people, it is a part of a colonial project that we're looking at. And any African who has any relationship to truth and history recognizes that this is a white man's war. Whether that African is in the Caribbean, or whether that African is in Europe or in Africa or in North America as it's characterized, we recognize what it is. We're talking about the attack on Africa resulting in a particular kind of economy. It is a particular mode of production that is a colonial mode of production that it determines how the economy and the politics and throughout the world are created and how they are developed, and what is the process that pushes it forward. It is colonialism. It is the attack on Africa that's central to all of this. And the attack on Russia in 1917 came about because Russia was a country that did not come from colonialism, but was born as a part of the process to fight against colonialism. And this is the reason you have this white man's war today that's still advancing on Russia 105 years after the Russian Revolution. So I think it's really important for our people to understand this and to recognize what they see. The same Zuckerberg and the rest of them who will not allow us to have any kind of discussion that we want to have, the same media sources that refuse to come to press conference and do other things when somebody wants to talk about the conditions that we are experiencing in the world as African people. These are the forces that are feeding the garbage that stinks around the whole world, painting Russia as the bully, painting the so-called heroic Zelensky and Ukraine, and daring not even to say why some of these countries are even lined up with the United States because they want to be part and parcel of a colonial mode of production. They want to be part of the white world that lives at the expense of Africa, lives at the expense of Black people around the world, lives at the expense of the people who are colonized. That's what we're looking at. And as I said earlier, this move against Russia is like a lynch mob. They move without any rationale that's acceptable to anybody in the world who except the colonizers. And the colonizers, that's the white world. And it became white, in fact, as a part of the process of coming into existence as a colonial mode of production. So I want to thank everybody for coming out, and the African People's Socialist Party, you should be aware of this. We'll be having teach-ins and forums and public discussions around this question all over the world, in Africa, in various places in Africa, in the Caribbean. We'll be doing this. We'll be doing this within the United States, in various regions of the United States, and also we'll be doing this throughout Europe. So we think it's really important, because what begins to be exposed as we continue to have this discussion is that indeed this war against Russia is a white man's war. It is that was born from enslaving Black people and colonizing Black people around the world. It must be defeated. And so I thank you again.